Dad.
Dad, why doesn't Mom come home anymore?
Annie's voice was small, but the question landed on the table between them like something heavy and breakable. She was quiet for a moment after asking. Then she spoke again, more carefully this time, like she was trying to solve a problem on her own before asking for help. Does Mom hate you? Annie asked quietly. Or did you do something bad so Mom doesn't need us anymore? William Carter didn't answer right away. From where he sat, he could see the owner of the restaurant behind the counter. The woman was packing takeout boxes, pouring coffee, moving quickly from one customer to another. She wore a simple apron, her hair tied back, her sleeves rolled up like someone used to working long hours. Annie followed his eyes. I like her, Annie said. She always gives me extra bread, and she calls me sweetheart. Annie paused. She feels like someone who wouldn't leave. William swallowed and looked back at his daughter. Your mom doesn't hate you, he said quietly. Annie hesitated, then asked the question she had been thinking about for a long time. Is it because of Grandpa and Grandma? She asked. Did Mom not make them happy? Did they not like her so Mom had to leave? William looked down at the table. Your mom, he said slowly, is a very good woman. The best woman I have ever known. His voice grew rougher. But when I was younger, I was proud and stupid. I thought listening to my parents was the same as being a good son. I thought building a company was more important than protecting the person I loved. Annie listened very carefully. And because of that, William continued, I lost her. Not because she stopped loving us, but because I didn't protect her when she needed me. Annie looked down at her hands. So Mom left because she was hurt? Yes, William said. She left because I hurt her. And I have regretted that every day since. Annie was quiet for a moment. Then she asked softly, do you still love her? William tried to answer, but the word got stuck in his throat. His eyes filled with tears before he could stop them. He covered his face with his hand, but the sob still came out, deep and broken, like something that had been trapped inside him for years. I never stopped, he said, his voice shaking. I never stopped loving her. I was just too weak to stand next to her when it mattered. Annie quickly got out of her chair and walked around the table, hugging him. It's okay, Dad, she whispered. You can say sorry. Mom always says people can say sorry and come home again. At that exact moment, a loud crash came from the counter. A tray fell. A bowl shattered. Soup spilled across the floor. William and Annie both turned in shock. The owner of the restaurant stood frozen behind the counter, staring at them. Her hands were shaking. Her face had gone pale. For a second, no one moved. Then William stood up quickly and walked toward the counter. Annie ran after him. When William reached the counter, the woman had already crouched down, trying to pick up the broken pieces with trembling hands. Careful, William said gently as he knelt down. You'll cut yourself. I'm fine, the woman said quickly, her voice low, her face turned away. It was an accident. I'll clean it. William picked up a napkin and helped gather the broken pieces of the bowl. Annie stood close beside him, watching quietly. As William reached for another piece, the woman reached for the same piece at the same time. Their hands touched. The woman froze. William froze too. The woman lifted her head and William Carter felt the world drop out from under him. His voice came out as a whisper, broken and unbelieving. Sarah? The woman's eyes filled with tears instantly. She quickly turned her face away, trying to stand up, trying to walk away, but William stood up faster and gently caught her wrist. Sarah, wait, he said, his voice shaking now. Please, don't walk away again. She stopped, but she didn't turn back. Her shoulders were trembling. Behind him, Annie looked from her father to the woman, confused and silent, not understanding why the air suddenly felt so heavy. He swallowed. I know, he said. I lost the right to belong anywhere near you a long time ago. At that moment, Annie slowly reached out and held Sarah's free hand. Sarah looked down. Her breath caught. The little hand holding hers was warm, small, trusting. Annie looked up at her with gentle eyes and asked softly, Why are you crying? Did you get hurt? Sarah couldn't answer. She just stared at the little girl's face. her eyes moving slowly across Annie's features, like she was trying to remember something she had lost a long time ago. William's voice came again, quiet, trembling, but clear this time. "Do you recognize her?" he asked. "Sarah, do you recognize our daughter?" Sarah's entire body went still. William continued, his voice breaking. "This is Annie. This is our daughter. When you left, I raised her alone. I watched her take her first steps. I took her to her first day of school. I held her when she cried at night because she missed you. She has been waiting for you for 6 years, Sarah." Sarah's hand began to shake in Annie's hand. Annie looked between them, confused. "Dad," she whispered. William knelt down beside Annie and gently put his hand on her shoulder. "Annie," he said softly, "this is your mom." The world seemed to go completely silent. Sarah slowly sank down into the chair behind her like her legs could no longer hold her. She covered her mouth with her hand, staring at Annie, tears falling one after another. Annie looked at her, really looked at her, like she was trying to match a face to a memory she didn't fully have anymore. Then Annie said the one sentence that broke what was left of Sarah's heart. "I made a list of things to tell you when you come home," Annie said softly. "I didn't know you were already here." Sarah let out a broken sob, and William stood there between the two people he loved most in the world, knowing that this moment, this small restaurant, this broken bowl on the floor, this little girl holding her mother's hand, was the moment that would decide the rest of their lives. Sarah's fingers were still trembling in Annie's small hand. For a long moment, she could not speak. Sarah finally whispered, her voice barely audible. She was just a baby." William nodded slowly. "She was 3 months old when you left." Sarah closed her eyes as if the number itself had weight. 3 months. A baby who still needed to be held to sleep. A baby who still smelled like milk and powder. A baby who did not understand why her mother was suddenly gone. "I didn't leave because I wanted to," Sarah said quietly, still not looking at him. "Your mother came to see me. Do you remember that, William?" "Of course you do." "She didn't even sit down. She just stood in my apartment and looked around like everything I owned was dirty." William's jaw tightened. He remembered. "I was still recovering," Sarah continued. "I had stitches. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a time in weeks. Annie cried every night. I was so tired I couldn't think straight. And your mother stood there and told me I was ruining your life." Annie looked between them, not understanding every word, but understanding enough to know this was about her. Sarah's voice shook, but she kept talking, like if she stopped now she would never be able to say these things again. "She said if I loved you, I would leave. She said your father's lawyers were already preparing papers. She said they would take Annie away from me because I had no money, no house, no family with power. She said I would lose in court and never see my daughter again." William felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He had known his parents had pressured Sarah. He had not known everything. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly. Sarah laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "I did tell you. You just didn't hear me." William had no answer for that. "I went to your office," she continued. "Do you remember? I waited 2 hours to see you. When I finally got in, you were in a meeting with your father and 2 lawyers. You looked at me like I was a problem you didn't have time to solve." William closed his eyes. He remembered that day too. He remembered feeling embarrassed that she had come. He remembered thinking, not here, not in front of them. "You told me you would handle it," Sarah said, her voice breaking slightly. "You told me to go home and not worry. But a week later, I got a letter from your family's lawyer. It said if I fought for you, they would make sure I never worked in this city again. They said they would investigate me. My past, my family, everything. They said they would make me look like an unfit mother." Annie's grip on Sarah's hand tightened. "So you left," William said, his voice low. Sarah nodded slowly. "I left because I thought if I disappeared, your family would leave you alone. I thought you would have a better life. I thought Annie would have a better life with you than with me, fighting people who had more money than I could even imagine." She finally looked at Annie again, really looked this time, tears falling freely now. "I left because I thought I was protecting you," she whispered. Annie didn't fully understand everything. but she understood one thing very clearly. This woman in front of her was crying the way her father cried when he thought no one could hear him. "Did you know," William said slowly, "that every night Annie leaves the porch light on?" Sarah looked at him. "She says it so you can find your way home," he continued. "She has a notebook, a list of things she wants to tell you when you come back. She writes in it every week, so she doesn't forget anything. If this story touched your heart, please like the video and leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. And if you believe in second chances, family, and doing the right thing, even when it is hard, please subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next story." Sarah covered her mouth again as a sob escaped. "I didn't know where you were," William said. "I tried to find you at first. Then my father told me if I kept looking, the company would suffer. The board would remove me, and I would lose everything. And I told myself Annie needed stability. She needed the house, the school, the future I could give her." He paused, his voice filled with regret. "So I stopped looking, and that is something I will regret for the rest of my life." Sarah shook her head slowly. "We were both young," she said. "We were both scared. The difference is, I ran away, and you stayed. But neither of us fought the way we should have." Annie looked at both of them and said softly, "But you're both here now." Sarah looked down at Annie again. "You're 6 now?" she asked, her voice trembling. Annie nodded. "I just turned 6. Dad made pancakes, but he burned them." Sarah let out a small, broken laugh through her tears. "He always burned pancakes," she said without thinking. William almost smiled. "I still do," he admitted. For a moment, the three of them just stood there in the middle of the restaurant, like time had folded in on itself and given them a second chance to stand in the same place again, but as different people. "Why didn't you tell me she was my mom?" Annie asked William quietly. William knelt down in front of her so they were eye level. "Because I didn't know where she was," he said. "And because I was ashamed, Annie. I was ashamed that I didn't protect her. I didn't want you to grow up thinking your father was a man who let the best thing in his life walk away." Annie thought about that, then said something that neither of them would ever forget. "My teacher says you're not a bad person if you make a mistake," she said. "You're a bad person if you don't fix it after." William felt his throat tighten again. Sarah looked at Annie like she was seeing a miracle and a wound at the same time. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered to Annie. "I am so sorry I wasn't there when you were little." Annie shook her head quickly. "It's okay," she said, just like she always did when someone else was hurting. "You can come home now." Sarah looked up at William. There were 6 years of pain, anger, love, regret, and unfinished words in that one look. "Is there still a place for me?" she asked him quietly. William answered without hesitation this time. "There has never been anyone else," he said. "There has always been a place for you. I just didn't know if you would ever want to come back." Sarah looked down at Annie, who was still holding her hand like she had no intention of letting go. For the first time in 6 years, Sarah allowed herself to imagine something she had forbidden herself to think about: going home. Sarah did not go home with them that night. That was the first thing Annie did not understand. After everything, after the tears, after the truth, after the words, "This is your mom," Annie had simply assumed that the three of them would leave the restaurant together, get into the car together, and go home together like a normal family. But adults, Annie was beginning to learn, made simple things very complicated. "I have to close the restaurant," Sarah said softly, wiping her eyes and trying to steady her voice. "I can't just leave." William nodded immediately. "Of course, I understand." Annie looked from one to the other. "We can wait," she said. "Dad has a lot of time. He just works on his computer and drinks coffee." William almost laughed at that, but the sound got lost somewhere in his chest. "It's a school night," Sarah said gently, kneeling down in front of Annie. She was close now, close enough to see the tiny details. The small freckle near Annie's left eyebrow, the way Annie's hair curled slightly at the ends, the way she held her backpack strap when she felt unsure. Sarah had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but in her imagination Annie was always still a baby. She had never imagined meeting her again like this, standing in her restaurant, already a little person with her own thoughts and questions and memories that did not include her mother. Do Do you like to read? Sarah asked quietly, not knowing what else to say, not knowing how to start being a mother to a 6-year-old she had not raised. Annie nodded quickly. I can read chapter books. Dad reads slow, but I read fast. William raised an eyebrow. I do not read slow. You fall asleep, Annie said. That is not the same as reading slow, William replied. Sarah laughed softly before she could stop herself. And the sound surprised all three of them. It had been so long since the three of them had stood in the same space, talking like this, that even a small laugh felt like something fragile and important. I used to read to you, Sarah said to Annie without thinking. Annie tilted her head. When I was a baby? Sarah nodded, her eyes shining again. Every night, you would fall asleep on my chest before I finished the book. Annie thought about that very seriously. I remember a song, she said slowly. Someone used to sing a song. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. What song? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Annie frowned, trying to remember. Then, very quietly, a little unsure of the words, she sang, You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. Sarah made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. She pulled Annie into her arms without asking, holding her tightly, like she was trying to make up for 6 years in one moment. I used to sing that to you every night, Sarah whispered into Annie's hair. Every night. Annie hugged her back like it was the most natural thing in the world. Then you are my mom, Annie said simply. As if the song itself was proof enough, William turned away for a moment and looked out the window because his eyes were burning again. He had built towers of glass and steel, had signed contracts worth more than most people would see in a lifetime, but nothing in his life had ever felt as important as the small moment happening behind him. After a while, Sarah let Annie go and stood up, wiping her eyes again, trying to return to being the owner of the restaurant, the woman who had survived on her own for 6 years. I close at 9, she said to William, her voice more steady now. If you want to come back then, we can talk. There are things Annie should know, things we should explain properly. William nodded. We'll come back, Annie immediately asked. Are you coming home with us after? Sarah looked at William. William looked at Sarah. 6 years of history sat in the silence between that question and any possible answer. We'll talk tonight, Sarah said gently to Annie. Okay? Annie studied her face carefully, like she was trying to decide if this was another adult promise that might disappear later. Okay, Annie said finally. But we're not leaving you again. Sarah closed her eyes for a second when she heard that. I'm not leaving you again, she whispered. William drove home in near silence that night. Annie sat in the back seat, holding her small pink notebook against her chest like it was something important. Halfway home, she said, Dad? Yes? Why didn't you find Mom sooner? William kept his eyes on the road. The city lights moved across the windshield in long, quiet lines. I tried, he said. At first. But my father told me if I kept looking for her, he would take the company away from me. He said I had responsibilities. He said I had to choose. And you chose the company? Annie asked. William's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. I told myself I was choosing your future, your school, your house, your safety. He paused. But if I'm honest, I was also choosing the easier fight. Annie was quiet in the back seat. My teacher says easy choices are usually the wrong ones, she said. William nodded slowly. Your teacher is a very smart person. When they got home, Annie ran inside and immediately went to the small table near the stairs where she kept her notebook. She opened it and wrote something very carefully, her tongue slightly sticking out the way it did when she concentrated. William watched her from the doorway. What are you writing? He asked. Annie didn't look up. I'm adding to the list. What did you write? Annie finished the sentence, then closed the notebook and looked at him. I wrote, she said proudly. I found Mom. She was working in a restaurant, and she didn't know I was there. But I found her. William felt something twist in his chest again. Annie walked over and took his hand. Dad, she said. Are you scared? He looked down at her. Yes, he said honestly. I am. Why? Because sometimes, he said slowly, when you break something very important, You don't know if it can ever be fixed again. Annie thought about that. Then she squeezed his hand. Mom still sang the song, Annie said. That means she still loves us, so we can fix it. William looked at his daughter and wondered, not for the first time, how someone so small could be the bravest person in the room. At 8:45 that night, Annie was already in her pajamas when she walked into William's office holding the notebook again. Can I come tonight? She asked. It's late, William said gently. But it's about me, Annie said. I think I should come. William looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, you can come. As they walked back to the car together, Annie slipped her hand into his. Dad? She said. Yes? When Mom comes home, can we still leave the light on, just in case she gets lost again? William squeezed her hand gently. Yes, he said. We'll always leave the light on. When they returned to the restaurant that night, the lights inside were softer, and most of the customers were gone. The chairs from half the tables had already been turned upside down and placed on top, and the sound of a mop moving across the floor came from the back. Sarah stood behind the counter, counting the register. She looked up when she heard the door open, and for a brief moment she froze again. When she saw them, William, in his dark coat, Annie beside him in her small jacket, holding her pink notebook with both hands like she was carrying something important. You came, Sarah said quietly. We said we would, William replied. Annie walked straight up to the counter like she had been coming here her whole life. Maybe, in some strange way, she had. I brought my list, Annie said, lifting the notebook slightly. In case you want to know what you missed. Sarah pressed her lips together, trying not to cry again. I would like that very much, she said. They sat at a small table this time. Not the one by the window. This one was closer, more private. Like the restaurant itself understood that this conversation did not belong to the rest of the world. For a few moments, none of them spoke. The sound of the refrigerator humming and the occasional car passing outside filled the silence. Finally, Sarah folded her hands on the table and looked at Annie. Can I ask you something? She said gently. Annie nodded. Did he take good care of you? Sarah asked, and the question came out more fragile than she intended. Annie looked surprised. Of course, she said. Dad doesn't know how to braid hair and he burns pancakes and he works too much. But he always comes home. He never forgets to pick me up, and when I have bad dreams, he sleeps on the floor next to my bed. Sarah looked at William quickly, and William looked down at the table, slightly embarrassed. I didn't know how to be a father, he said quietly, but I knew how to stay. Sarah's eyes filled again. Thank you, she whispered, for not letting her grow up alone. William shook his head slightly. She was never alone, he said. She just didn't have everything she deserved. Annie opened her notebook. Can I read it now? She asked. Sarah nodded, her hands gripping each other tightly under the table. Annie opened to the first page and began to read slowly, carefully, sounding out a few words but determined to read it herself. I lost my first tooth and I put it under my pillow, and the tooth fairy gave me $5, and Dad said that's too much for one tooth, but I think the tooth fairy likes me. Sarah let out a small laugh through her tears. I started first grade and I can read big books now, and my teacher says I am very kind. Sarah whispered. You are. I learned how to ride a bike, but I fell 2 times and Dad ran very fast for a grown-up. William muttered. I was not running. I was walking quickly. Annie ignored him and kept reading. Dad burned pancakes, but I ate them anyway so he wouldn't feel bad. Sarah covered her mouth. I think Dad is lonely, but he tries not to show me. William closed his eyes briefly when he heard that line. I am not mad at you, Mom. Annie read, her voice softer now. I am just waiting. By the time Annie finished reading, Sarah was crying openly, and even William's eyes were wet again. I didn't know, Sarah whispered. I didn't know she remembered me. I thought she would forget. Annie looked confused. Why would I forget you? You're my mom. Sarah reached across the table slowly, like she was afraid Annie might disappear if she moved too fast, and took Annie's small hand again. I stayed away because I thought I was protecting you, Sarah said. Your grandparents are very powerful people. They told me if I came back, they would take you away from me forever. I thought if I disappeared, you could grow up safely with your dad and have a good life." Annie frowned. "But that was a bad plan," she said. William let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "Yes," he said. "It was a bad plan." Sarah looked at William. "Why didn't you tell her about me?" she asked quietly. "Because I didn't know where you were," William said. "And because I was ashamed. I didn't want her to know that her father was a man who let the woman he loved walk out the door alone with a baby and did nothing to stop it." "You were not the only one who did nothing," Sarah said softly. "I left too." "You left because you were protecting her," William said. "I stayed because I was protecting myself. Those are not the same thing." They looked at each other for a long time, years of anger and love and regret moving silently between them. Annie looked from one to the other and then asked the most important question in the simplest possible way. "So what happens now?" she asked. Neither adult answered immediately. Finally, Sarah said, "I don't know." William nodded. "I don't know either." Annie thought about that. Then she closed her notebook and said, "I know." They both looked at her. "You come home," Annie said to Sarah. "And Dad says sorry. And we eat dinner together. And we don't let Grandpa and Grandma be the boss anymore." William stared at his daughter. Sarah stared at her too. Children, William thought, see the world in straight lines. Adults are the ones who make it complicated. "It's not that simple," Sarah said gently. "Why not?" Annie asked. "Because sometimes," Sarah said, "people get hurt so badly that they don't know how to go back to the place where they were hurt." Annie was quiet for a moment, thinking very hard. Then she slid off her chair, walked around the table, and climbed onto Sarah's lap like she had belonged there her whole life. "You can sit next to me," Annie said, wrapping her arms around Sarah's neck. "No one will hurt you if you sit next to me." Sarah broke down completely then, holding her daughter for the first time since Annie had been a baby, crying into her hair while Annie held on tightly like she had finally found something she had been missing her whole life but didn't know how to name. William sat across from them, watching the two people he loved most in the world hold each other, and understood something very clearly in that moment. Money could solve problems. Power could protect you from enemies. But neither money nor power could fix a broken family. Only humility could do that. Only apology. Only love that was willing to come back and try again. After a long time, Sarah looked up at William. Annie still, in her arms. "If I come back," she said quietly, "it won't be because of your money, or your house, or your name." "I know," William said. "It will be because of her," Sarah said, holding Annie a little tighter, "and because I want to try again. But this time, if your family tries to push me out again, I will not leave quietly." William nodded once, firmly. "This time," he said, "you won't be standing alone." Annie looked between them and smiled, a small, hopeful, gap-toothed smile. "Then it's decided," she said. "Mom is coming home," and for the first time in 6 years, neither of them corrected her. Sarah did not come home that night, but something had changed. All three of them felt it. It was like a door that had been closed for 6 years was now open just a few inches, and on the other side of that door was everything they had lost, everything they had not said, everything they still might become if they were brave enough. William and Annie began coming to the restaurant every evening after that. At first, Sarah protested. "You don't have to come here every day," she said. "This place is small. You're used to better restaurants." William shook his head. "I'm not here for the food," he said simply. Annie added, "I'm here for my mom." After that, Sarah stopped arguing. The restaurant became their in-between place. Not the past, not the future, but a quiet middle where they could learn how to be in the same room again. William would sit at the counter with his laptop closed, something he rarely did anywhere else. Annie would do her homework at a corner table, and Sarah would move between the kitchen and the tables, but now her eyes looked up more often, always checking, always making sure they were still there. One evening, Annie was coloring at the table while William and Sarah stood near the counter talking quietly. "Why didn't you remarry?" Sarah asked suddenly. "A man like you. I'm sure there were many women." William looked at her for a long moment before answering. "There were women who liked my money," he said. "There were women who liked my last name. There were women who liked the idea of my life. But there was only one woman I ever loved. Sarah looked down at the counter, her fingers tracing a small scratch in the wood. I heard about you sometimes, she said. You were in the newspapers. New buildings, new projects, awards. They always said you were a genius, a self-made man, a man who never failed. William let out a quiet breath. I failed where it mattered most. Sarah didn't respond to that. She didn't need to. They both knew it was true. Across the room, Annie suddenly looked up from her coloring. Mom, she said, testing the word carefully, like it was new but also very old. Do you know how to braid hair? Sarah blinked, surprised. Yes, she said softly. I do. Annie immediately ran over with a hair tie in her hand. Dad tries, but it looks like a bird's nest, she said. William sighed. It is very difficult. Sarah smiled for the first time without sadness behind it. Come here, she said, pulling a chair closer. Annie climbed up, and Sarah gently began separating her hair into 3 even sections. Her hands moved slowly at first, like she was afraid of doing something wrong, but then the movement came back to her, something her body remembered even after 6 years. When you were a baby, Sarah said quietly as she worked, you had so much hair. I used to braid it when it got too hot. Annie sat very still, enjoying the feeling of someone gently doing her hair. No one ever braided my hair before, Annie said. William looked away when he heard that. Sarah finished the braid and tied it off, then turned Annie slightly so she could see her reflection in the dark window. Do you like it? Sarah asked. Annie touched the braid carefully and smiled. I love it, she said. Then she leaned back slightly against Sarah and added, very simply, it feels like something I forgot. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment and rested her hand lightly on Annie's shoulder. That night, when the restaurant was closing, William helped Sarah carry a heavy box of supplies from the back room. Annie followed behind them, dragging a small chair across the floor so she could help, even though the chair was almost as big as she was. You don't have to do this, Sarah told William, as he set the box down. I know, he said. I want to. Sarah studied him for a moment. You never carried boxes before, she said. You used to say your job was to sign papers, not carry things. William nodded. I used to say a lot of stupid things. Annie looked between them. Dad is stronger now, she announced. He can carry groceries and school bags and me when I fall asleep. Sarah smiled slightly. That's good, she said. Those are the important things to carry. They finished closing the restaurant together. Sarah turned off the lights in the kitchen, then the lights in the dining area, until only the small lamp near the register was still on. They stood near the door, not quite sure how to say goodnight. Will you come tomorrow? Annie asked immediately. Sarah looked at William, then back at Annie. Yes, she said. I'll be here tomorrow. Annie nodded, satisfied. Then she said, one day you won't have to stay here. One day you can come home and eat with us at the big table. Sarah looked at William when she heard that. Big table? She asked. William nodded. There are 12 chairs, he said, but we only use 2. Sarah looked down at Annie. Maybe one day, she said softly. When William and Annie got home that night, Annie did something she had not done in a long time. She ran to the front door, unlocked it, then turned on the porch light. William watched her. You still turn that on every night, he said. Annie nodded. Yes, but now it's different. How? Before, Annie said, I turned it on so Mom could find her way home. She looked up at him and smiled. Now I turn it on so she knows we're still waiting. William stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at the small light glowing in the dark. 6 years ago, he had stood in a hospital room holding a 3-month-old baby while the woman he loved walked out of his life because he had not been brave enough to stand between her and his family. Tonight, that same baby had turned on a light and said, we're still waiting. And for the first time in a very long time, William Carter allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, some mistakes were not the end of the story. Some mistakes were just the beginning of the part where you tried to make things right. The next evening, Annie ran into the restaurant like she belonged there. She didn't hesitate anymore. She didn't stand near the door or look back to make sure her father was behind her. She walked straight to the counter, climbed onto the tall stool, and said, very seriously. "Hi, Mom." Sarah, who had been pouring coffee, stopped mid-motion. The word still startled her every time. Mom. For 6 years, no one had called her that. "Hi," Sarah said softly. "Did you have a good day at school?" Annie nodded. "I got a gold star in reading. And I told my teacher I found my mom." Sarah blinked. "You told your teacher?" "Yes," Annie said proudly. "She asked where you were and I said she was lost, but we found her." William, who had just walked in behind Annie, almost choked on a laugh when he heard that. Sarah covered her mouth, trying not to laugh and cry at the same time. "Well," Sarah said, "that's one way to explain it." Annie opened her backpack and took out her homework. "I'm going to do my math here so you can see that I'm very smart," she announced. "I believe you," Sarah said. "No, you have to see," Annie insisted. "Because you missed kindergarten and first grade." The words were simple, not accusing, just factual, but they still landed softly and painfully at the same time. "I did miss those things," Sarah said quietly. "I'm sorry." Annie looked up from her paper. "It's okay," she said again, the same way she always said it, the way children say it when they care more about having you now than blaming you for before. William sat at the counter, watching them. For the first time in years, he did not take out his phone, did not open his laptop, did not check his email. He just sat there, listening to the sound of Annie's pencil scratching on paper and Sarah moving around the kitchen. It sounded like something he had not heard in a very long time. It sounded like a life. Later that evening, when the restaurant was quiet, Annie went to the restroom. And for the first time since they had found Sarah, William and Sarah were alone for a moment. Sarah wiped the counter slowly, not looking at him. "She's a good girl," she said. "She is," William replied. "She's better than I deserve." Sarah stopped wiping the counter and leaned her hands on it, looking down. "Did she ever ask why I left?" she asked. "Every year," William said, "but the questions changed as she got older." "What do you mean?" "When she was very small, she asked when you were coming home," William said. "Then when she was 4, she asked if you got lost. When she was 5, she asked if you forgot us. This year," he paused. "This year she asked if you left because of me." Sarah closed her eyes. "And what did you tell her?" she asked. "The truth," William said. "I told her you left because I didn't protect you from my family. I told her that was my fault, not yours." Sarah looked at him then, really looked at him, like she was trying to see if he meant it. "You told her that?" she asked quietly. "Yes," he said. "I'm done lying to make myself look better." Sarah nodded slowly. "Good," she said, "because I don't want her to grow up thinking I left because I didn't love her." "She knows you love her," William said. "She never doubted that." "Not once." Sarah turned away quickly, pretending to rearrange something on the shelf. "My mother used to say," William continued slowly, "that children always know who loves them. You can't hide that from them. You can only hide from it yourself." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Your mother also said I wasn't good enough to raise your child." William's jaw tightened. "My mother was wrong." Sarah gave a small, sad smile. "Your mother has never believed she was wrong about anything." William leaned forward slightly. "She doesn't get to decide anything anymore." Sarah looked at him carefully when he said that. "You really believe that?" she asked. "Yes," William said, "because I lost you once by choosing their world over you. I won't lose you again for the same reason." Before Sarah could answer, Annie came running back, slightly out of breath. "Mom," Annie said, "do you want to see my room sometime?" Sarah blinked, surprised by the question. "Your room?" "Yes," Annie said. "It's very pink. Dad didn't choose it. I chose it. And I have a nightlight and a shelf for books and a space on my wall where I was saving a place for your picture." Sarah's eyes filled again. "You saved a place for my picture?" Annie nodded. "Yes, because every kid in my class has a picture of their mom in their room. And I didn't want you to feel left out when you came back." William turned his face slightly away when he heard that, pressing his lips together. Sarah knelt down in front of Annie. "I would like to see your room very much," she said. "Okay," Annie said, satisfied. "You can come on Sunday. Sunday is family day." Dad doesn't work on Sunday. He just drinks coffee and pretends not to work. I do not pretend, William said. I actually do not work on Sundays. You answer emails, Annie said. That is not work. That is light thinking, William replied. Sarah laughed again, and this time the sound stayed in the room a little longer. That night, when William and Annie were about to leave, Annie hugged Sarah tightly. Don't disappear again, Annie said into her coat. Sarah held her just as tightly. I won't, she whispered. I promise I won't disappear again. As they walked to the car, Annie looked up at William and asked, Dad, are you happy? William thought about that question very carefully before answering. I think, he said slowly, I am starting to feel something I haven't felt in a long time. What is it? Annie asked. Hope, he said. Annie nodded like that was exactly the right answer. When they got home, Annie ran to the front door again and turned on the porch light. Then she ran to her room, took her notebook, and added another line to the list. Tonight, Mom braided my hair. Tonight, Dad smiled for real. Tonight, we felt like a family. She closed the notebook carefully and placed it under her pillow, like something precious. Downstairs, William stood alone in the quiet house for a moment, looking at the third chair at the dining table. For 6 years, that chair had been empty. But now, for the first time, it no longer looked like a reminder of what he had lost. It looked like a place someone might come back to. On Sunday morning, Annie woke up earlier than usual. She got out of bed, brushed her hair the way she had seen Sarah do it in the restaurant mirror, and chose her favorite yellow dress, the one with small white flowers that she said made her look like a sunshine person. Then she walked downstairs and found William already in the kitchen, standing in front of the stove, staring at a frying pan like it had personally offended him. Are you fighting with the pancakes again? Annie asked. William glanced over his shoulder. They are difficult, he said. They look very simple, but they are not. Annie climbed onto a chair and watched him flip one. It folded in half. Dad, Annie said gently, I think you are flipping them too early. You have to wait for the bubbles. William looked at the pancake. How do you know that? I watch cooking videos with Lucy's mom, Annie said. You flip when the bubbles come. That means it's ready. William looked at the pancake again like he was negotiating a business deal with it. Then he waited. Small bubbles appeared. He flipped it again. This time, it landed flat and golden. Annie gasped. You did it! William allowed himself a small, proud smile. I did. Annie leaned her chin on the counter. Mom is coming today, she said, as if she needed to remind the world so it wouldn't forget. Yes, William said quietly. She is. Annie was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, Are you nervous? William did not answer right away. He put the pancake on a plate and turned off the stove. Yes, he said finally. I am. Me too, Annie admitted. But it's a good nervous. Not a bad nervous, William nodded. He understood exactly what she meant. Around 11, a car pulled into the driveway. Annie ran to the window so fast she almost slipped on the floor. She's here, Annie whispered, like if she said it too loud the moment might disappear. William walked to the door slowly, his heart beating harder than it had in years. He had given speeches in front of thousands of people without fear. But opening this door felt harder than any of that. When he opened it, Sarah stood there holding a small paper bag with both hands like she needed something to hold on to. I brought lunch, she said. I didn't know what Annie likes, so I brought a few things. Annie ran forward and hugged her before she could say anything else. You're here? Annie said into her coat, like she still couldn't quite believe it. I'm here, Sarah said softly, holding her. William stepped aside. Come in. Sarah walked into the house slowly, looking around like someone walking into a memory. The house was large, quiet, clean, in a way that suggested more space than people. It's big, she said. Annie took her hand immediately. Come see my room, she said. I saved a place for your picture. Sarah let Annie pull her upstairs. William followed a few steps behind, watching the two of them walk together, his daughter talking nonstop. Sarah listening like every word mattered. When they reached Annie's room, Annie pushed the door open proudly. The room was pink, full of books, stuffed animals, drawings taped to the wall, and a small bed with a yellow blanket. "This is my room," Annie said, "and this is the wall where I was going to put your picture." On the wall, there was a space between two drawings. One was a picture of Annie and William holding hands. The other was a drawing of three people, a tall man, a small girl, and a woman with long hair. Above them, Annie had written in careful letters, "My family." Sarah pressed her hand over her mouth when she saw it. "I drew you from memory," Annie said. "I wasn't sure if your hair was longer or shorter, so I made it medium." Sarah laughed through her tears. "It's perfect," she said. William stood in the doorway, looking at the drawing. He had seen it before, but now it meant something different. Before, it had been a wish. Now, it looked like a possibility. They went downstairs and sat at the dining table, the long table with 12 chairs. Sarah noticed immediately. "You weren't joking," she said quietly. "There really are 12 chairs." William nodded. "I bought the table when I thought success meant filling a house with people who wanted something from me." He paused. "Turns out, I only ever wanted 2 people to sit here." Annie pulled Sarah to the chair beside her. "You sit here," she said. This chair was empty for a long time. Sarah sat down slowly, looking at the table, at the plates, at the sunlight coming through the window. For a moment, she didn't speak. She just sat there, like she was trying to understand how life had brought her back to this exact place. They ate lunch together, soup, sandwiches, and a small apple pie Sarah had brought. Annie talked almost the entire time, telling Sarah about school, her teacher, her friend Lucy, the time she fell off her bike, the time William tried to fix her doll and made it worse. "You broke her arm," Annie told him. "I fixed her arm," William corrected. "You used tape," Annie said. "It was strong tape," William replied. Sarah laughed, and this time the sound filled the room like it belonged there. After lunch, Annie said, "I want to show Mom the porch light." William and Sarah looked at each other but didn't say anything. They followed Annie to the front door. Annie opened the door and pointed to the small light beside it. "I turn this on every night," she said, "so you can find your way home." Sarah stared at the light for a long time. Then she asked quietly, "Even in the summer?" "Every night," Annie said. "Dad says it wastes electricity, but I told him it's important." William said nothing. Sarah walked out onto the porch and stood beside the light. She touched the wall gently, like she was touching something sacred. "I used to leave a light on too," she said quietly. "In the apartment. The night I left the kitchen light on because I thought maybe I would come back in the morning." William stood behind her. "Why didn't you?" he asked softly. Sarah didn't turn around when she answered. "Because I was afraid if I came back, your family would take Annie away from me forever," she said. "And I thought you would choose them again." William felt that like a knife in his chest because he knew she had been right to think that. The man he had been 6 years ago might have done exactly that, but he was not that man anymore. "I was a coward," he said quietly, "but I am not that man anymore." Sarah turned then and looked at him. They stood there in the quiet afternoon light, with Annie between them, holding both of their hands like she had decided this was how things were supposed to be. "People can change," Annie said, looking up at both of them. "My teacher says people can change if they are brave." William looked at Sarah. "I am trying to be brave now," he said. Sarah looked at Annie, then back at William. For the first time since she had walked into the restaurant and dropped that tray, Sarah allowed herself to believe that maybe the story of her life with this man had not ended 6 years ago. Maybe it had just been waiting for them to find their way back. That afternoon, after Sarah left, the house felt different. It was still quiet, still large, still full of carefully chosen furniture and expensive things that had never really made it feel like a home. But now there was a new feeling in the rooms, something Annie noticed immediately but didn't have a big enough word to describe. William noticed it too. He stood in the dining room for a long time after closing the front door, looking at the chair where Sarah had sat. Annie had gone upstairs to draw, and the house was filled with that soft Sunday silence that usually felt lonely. Today, it didn't feel lonely. It felt like something was about to happen. He walked to the kitchen and poured himself a cup of coffee. then sat at the table and looked at his phone. There were 23 emails, 2 missed calls, messages from his assistant, a reminder about a board meeting Monday morning. For 6 years, work had been the place he hid. Work was where problems made sense. You could solve them with numbers, contracts, decisions. Work did not ask you why you let the woman you loved walk away with tears in her eyes and a baby in her arms. But now the problem he had to solve was not in an email. It was sitting in an empty chair at his dining table. Annie came downstairs an hour later holding a drawing. "Dad, I made something," she said. William put his phone down immediately. "Let me see." She handed him the paper. It was a drawing of 3 people standing in front of a house. There was a small light next to the door, drawn in bright yellow. "This is us," Annie said. "And this is the porch light. And this is Mom coming home." In the drawing, the woman was walking toward the house, and the little girl was running toward her. The man was standing by the door, waiting. William looked at the drawing for a long time. "You drew me taller than I am," he said quietly. "You are tall," Annie said. "In this picture, I look like a giant," he replied. "You have to be big so you can protect us," Annie said simply. William swallowed and nodded. "I'll try." That evening, after Annie went to bed, William sat alone in his office. He opened a drawer and took out something he had not looked at in years. It was a small photo. Sarah was sitting on a cheap couch, holding a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. She looked tired, her hair messy, but she was smiling in a way he had never seen anyone smile before or since. Like she was looking at the most important thing in the world. He remembered that day. Annie had been 10 days old. Sarah had insisted they take a picture even though she said she looked like a sleep-deprived raccoon. He had told her she looked beautiful. He had meant it. William sat there staring at the photo and said out loud, to the empty room, "I am so sorry." The next day at the office, William walked into the boardroom and immediately felt that old version of himself step back into place, the calm, controlled billionaire who made decisions and did not show emotion. The board members were already there. His father sat at the far end of the table, as always, like a king who had never given up his throne, even if the company now had William's name on the top floor. "We're moving forward with the South Side redevelopment," his father said without greeting. "The restaurant properties on that block will be bought out by the end of the month. Demolition starts after that." William didn't sit down. "The restaurant on the corner stays," William said. His father looked up slowly. "Excuse me?" "The small restaurant on the corner," William repeated. "It stays. We build around it." One of the board members spoke up. "That's not financially efficient." William looked at him. "Neither is making decisions that I don't approve." His father's voice grew colder. "You don't make emotional decisions in business, William." William met his father's eyes. "You taught me that business is about power. Well, I have the power now. And I'm telling you that restaurant stays." His father studied him for a long moment. "Is this about that woman?" he asked quietly. William didn't answer. Which was answer enough. "That girl was a mistake," his father said flatly, "and the woman was an even bigger one. I thought we settled this 6 years ago." William felt something in him go very still. Not angry. Not loud. Just still. "No," he said quietly. "You settled it 6 years ago. I just obeyed." The room was silent. "I'm not obeying anymore," William continued. "That restaurant stays. And if anyone here has a problem with that, you can take it up with me. Not with lawyers, not with threats. With me." His father leaned back in his chair, studying him like he was looking at a stranger. "You've changed," the older man said. William nodded once. "Yes," he said, "I have." That evening, when William and Annie walked into the restaurant, Sarah immediately knew something had happened. "You look like you fought with someone," she said. William hung his coat on the chair. "I did." "With who?" Annie asked. "My father," William said. Sarah went very still. "Why?" William looked at her. "Because of you," he said. "And because of Annie. They were going to buy this building and tear it down. I told them no." Sarah stared at him. "You fought your family for my restaurant?" William shook his head slightly. "Not for the restaurant," he said. for the woman who built it, and for the little girl who loves coming here. Sarah didn't know what to say to that. Annie, however, did. She smiled and said, "See, I told you Dad is brave now." William looked at his daughter and then at Sarah. For the first time in his life, he realized something very simple. Being a powerful man in the world was easy. Being a brave man in front of the people you loved was much harder. But this time, he intended to be both. The night after William told Sarah about the board meeting, the restaurant felt quieter than usual, not empty, just thoughtful, like the walls themselves were listening. Annie was sitting at her usual table doing homework, her legs swinging under the chair, her braids slightly messy from a long day at school. Sarah was wiping down the counter, and William sat across from Annie pretending to read something on his phone but mostly just watching the two of them exist in the same room. "Dad," Annie said without looking up from her homework. "Are we poor?" William blinked. "No," he said. "Why would you think that?" Annie shrugged. "Because Lucy said only poor people own small restaurants and rich people own big buildings, and you own big buildings, but Mom owns a small restaurant. So I was trying to understand if we are poor or rich or medium." Sarah stopped wiping the counter and turned slightly so she could hear the answer too. William put his phone down. "We are very rich in some ways," he said slowly, "and very poor in other ways." Annie frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "It will when you're older," he said gently. Annie thought about that, then said, "Mom's restaurant feels rich." Sarah looked at her, surprised. "It does?" "Yes," Annie said. "Because everyone who comes here smiles, and you remember their names, and you give people extra bread when they look sad. That's rich." Sarah turned away quickly, pretending to organize the napkins so Annie wouldn't see her eyes fill with tears. William watched Annie carefully. "You're right," he said. "That is a different kind of rich." Annie nodded, satisfied, and went back to her math. Later that evening, after the last customer left and Annie was drawing quietly, Sarah and William stood near the counter again. "You shouldn't have fought with your father because of me," Sarah said quietly. William shook his head. "I didn't fight with him because of you," he said. "I fought with him because for 6 years I have let him decide what my life should look like. And I am done with that." Sarah studied his face. "He's not going to forgive this easily," she said. "I'm not asking him to," William replied. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know they're going to come after me again, right? Not directly. But they'll make things difficult. Inspections, permits, rent, suppliers. That's how people like your family fight," quietly. William nodded. "I know. And this time," Sarah continued, "I won't run, but I also don't want Annie growing up in the middle of a war between rich people." William leaned against the counter and looked at Annie across the room. "Neither do I," he said. "So what are we going to do?" Sarah asked. William was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I spent most of my life learning how to build buildings," he said. "Now I think I need to learn how to build a family. And I think that might be harder." Sarah looked at him, and for the first time, she believed he meant that. Across the room, Annie suddenly looked up. "Mom," she said, testing the word again like she still liked how it sounded. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," Sarah said. "Why didn't you come see me on my birthdays?" Annie asked. The question was simple, but it went straight through Sarah's heart. "I didn't know where you lived," Sarah said softly. "I only knew the area. I used to drive by sometimes." "On your birthday?" Annie's eyes widened. "You did?" Sarah nodded. "I would park across the street and sit in the car. I saw the house with the big windows. I saw balloons one year. I saw you through the window once. You were wearing a pink dress and holding a cake." William looked at Sarah, shocked. "You were there?" Sarah nodded again. "I didn't come to the door because I was afraid your parents would be there. I was afraid they would take Annie away if they knew I was still around." Annie got up from her chair and walked slowly toward Sarah. "You were outside and didn't come in?" Annie asked. Sarah shook her head, tears falling again. "I thought it was the only way to keep you safe." Annie stood there for a moment, thinking in the serious way she did when something very important was happening in her mind. Then she did something neither adult expected. She hugged Sarah and said, very firmly, "Next time, you come inside. Even if Grandpa is mean. Because it's your house too," I decided. William let out a breath that sounded like something breaking and healing at the same time. Sarah held Annie tightly. "Okay," she whispered. "Next time, I come inside." Annie pulled back and looked at both of them. "I think grown-ups make things too hard," she said. William nodded. "We do. You should just say sorry and then eat dinner," Annie said. "That fixes most things." Sarah laughed softly through her tears. "You might be right." That night, when they were closing the restaurant, Annie fell asleep in one of the chairs, her head resting on her folded arms. William picked her up carefully, and Annie automatically curled into him, half asleep. Sarah watched them, her eyes soft. "She looks safe with you," Sarah said quietly. William looked down at his daughter. "She's the only thing I did right," he said. Sarah shook her head gently. "No," she said. "You didn't just give her a big house and a good school. You stayed. A lot of men with money don't stay. They send checks. You stayed." William looked at her then. "I didn't stay for the right reasons at first," he admitted. "At first, I stayed because I felt guilty. Then I stayed because I was afraid of losing the only person who still loved me without conditions. And somewhere along the way, I stayed because she became my whole world." Sarah nodded slowly. "She became mine the moment I knew she existed," she said. "I just didn't know how to fight people like your family and win." William adjusted Annie slightly in his arms so she wouldn't wake up. "You don't have to fight them alone anymore," he said quietly. Sarah looked at him for a long moment in the dim light of the restaurant. "I don't want your money, William," she said. "I don't want your last name. I don't want your world." "I know," he said. "I just want a normal life," she continued. "A small restaurant, a daughter who knows her mother, and a man who doesn't choose other people over us when things get hard." William held her gaze. "Then that's the man I have to be," he said. Sarah looked at Annie sleeping in his arms, then back at him. "We'll see," she said softly. "Not by what you say, by what you do." William nodded once. "That's fair." And for the first time, he understood that winning Sarah back would not happen with promises, or money, or power. It would happen in small, quiet moments. Over time. By showing up. By staying. By being the man he should have been. 6 years ago. The next morning, William woke up earlier than usual. Even before Annie. For a few minutes, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet house. He used to like the quiet. Quiet meant control. Quiet meant no problems. Now the quiet felt like time he had wasted. He got up, went downstairs, and stood in the kitchen for a long moment before opening a drawer. Inside, neatly organized, were things he had never paid attention to before. Annie's hair ties, small colorful clips, a pink brush, ribbons Sarah had quietly left on the counter a few nights ago after braiding Annie's hair. He picked up the brush and turned it over in his hand like it was a tool he had never learned to use. When Annie came downstairs, still in her pajamas, she stopped when she saw him holding the brush. "Are you going to try again?" she asked carefully. William nodded. "I'm going to try again." Annie walked over and climbed onto a chair. "Okay," she said. "But you have to be gentle. Mom is gentle." William swallowed slightly at that word again. Mom. It still felt like something fragile that could disappear if they moved too fast. He began brushing Annie's hair slowly, very carefully, like he was handling something that could break. "You're thinking very hard," Annie said. "Yes," William replied. "About Mom?" Annie asked. "Yes," he said again. Annie was quiet for a moment while he tried to separate her hair into 3 parts the way he had seen Sarah do. "Dad," Annie said, "are you scared Mom will leave again?" William stopped moving for a second. Then he continued braiding, slower this time. "Yes," he said honestly. "I am scared of that." Annie nodded like she understood. "Me too," she said. "So you have to be extra nice to her." William almost smiled. "Extra nice," he repeated. "Yes," Annie said, "and you have to say sorry more than one time, because when people are very hurt, one sorry is not enough." William tied the end of the braid and looked at it. It was not perfect. It was a little crooked, but it held. "I think," he said quietly, "you might be the smartest person in this house." "I know," Annie said confidently. Later that day, William received a call from his assistant. "Your father has scheduled a family dinner tonight," she said carefully. "He asked that you bring your daughter." William leaned back in his chair. "I see," he said. "He also said," she added, hesitating slightly, "that it is very important." William thanked her and hung up, then sat there for a long time without moving. That evening, when he and Annie arrived at the restaurant, Sarah immediately noticed something was wrong. "You look like you're about to go into a war," she said. "In a way, I am," William replied. Annie looked between them. "What kind of war?" "A family dinner," William said. Annie made a face. "That sounds worse than war." Sarah almost laughed. "Why do they want to see Annie?" she asked quietly, already knowing the answer. "Because they heard about you," William said, "and about the restaurant, and about the fact that I stopped the demolition." Sarah's expression changed. "They're going to try to take her," she said immediately. William shook his head. "They can't take her. She's my daughter." "They tried once," Sarah said. "Don't forget that." William didn't forget. He never had. Annie looked at both of them, sensing the tension. "Are Grandpa and Grandma mean?" she asked. William chose his words carefully. "They believe they are right about everything," he said. "And sometimes people like that hurt others without thinking they are doing anything wrong." Annie thought about that. "If they're mean to Mom, I won't like them," she said firmly. Sarah knelt down in front of her. "You don't have to choose," she said gently. "They are still your family." Annie shook her head. "You are my family too," she said. "I can choose to love the people who are nice." Sarah didn't know what to say to that, so she just hugged her. William watched them and felt that same quiet realization again. The real battle in his life was no longer in boardrooms. It was here. "Come to dinner with us," Annie suddenly said to Sarah. Both adults looked at her. "I think," Annie continued, very serious now, "if Grandpa and Grandma see Mom, they will understand she is nice and then everyone can stop being stupid." William covered his mouth to hide a laugh. Sarah looked horrified. "I am not going to your parents' house," she said immediately. "Why not?" Annie asked. "Because your grandparents and we don't make each other happy," Sarah said carefully. Annie looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Mom, you said brave people tell the truth. So maybe we all have to be brave at dinner." William looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at William. 6 years ago, he had let her stand alone in front of his family. This time would be different. "You won't be alone," William said quietly to her. "Not this time. Not ever again." Sarah studied his face, trying to see if this was the same man or a different one. "Let me think about it," she said. Annie nodded. "Okay. But if you don't come, I will tell them you are very nice, and they are missing out." William laughed softly. "That is a very strong strategy." "Yes," Annie said, "because it's true." That night, after they left the restaurant, Annie fell asleep in the car again, her head tilted to the side, her braid slightly messy, her notebook on her lap. William carried her into the house and laid her in bed, then pulled the blanket up to her chin. She opened her eyes slightly and whispered, half asleep, "Don't let them send Mom away again." William felt that sentence like a promise being placed in his hands. "I won't," he said quietly. "I won't let anyone send her away again." Annie nodded, already drifting back to sleep. "Okay," she whispered. "Then everything will be okay." William sat beside her bed for a long time after she fell asleep, listening to her breathe, thinking about the dinner tomorrow night, about his father, about the past, about the man he used to be and the man he was trying to become. 6 years ago, he had chosen power over love. Tomorrow night, he would have to prove that he was no longer that man. The Carter family house did not look like a place where people argued. It looked like a place where people made decisions that changed other people's lives. The driveway alone was longer than the entire street where Sarah's restaurant stood. The house stood behind iron gates and tall trees, the kind of place that made visitors feel like they had to speak quietly, even before they entered. William parked the car and turned off the engine. For a moment, neither he nor Annie moved. "Is this where Grandpa lives?" Annie asked quietly from the back seat. "Yes," William said. "It looks like a museum," Annie said. William almost smiled. That's not entirely wrong. He got out of the car and walked around to open Annie's door. She slipped her hand into his as they walked toward the front entrance together. "Remember," Annie said, looking up at him. "Be brave." William squeezed her hand gently. "You too." Inside, the house was exactly as William remembered. Marble floors, tall ceilings, paintings that no one was allowed to touch, and a silence that never felt peaceful, only controlled. A housekeeper led them into the dining room. His father was already there, sitting at the head of the long table. His mother sat to the right, perfectly dressed, perfectly still, like she had been waiting not just for dinner, but for a confrontation. They both looked at Annie first. His mother's expression softened slightly. "So this is Annie," she said. "You've grown." Annie nodded politely. "Hello, Grandma." His father looked at William. "You brought her," he said. "You asked me to," William replied. They sat down. Annie sat beside William, her small hand occasionally touching his sleeve like she was reminding herself he was still there. Dinner began quietly. Questions about school, about reading, about piano lessons Annie did not actually like but attended anyway because it's good for discipline, according to William's mother. Then, halfway through the meal, his father put his fork down. "Let's stop pretending this is a normal family dinner," the older man said calmly. "I want to talk about the restaurant." Annie looked up immediately. William remained calm. "The restaurant is not part of company business anymore," William said. "I made that clear." His father ignored him and looked at Annie instead. "Do you like that restaurant?" he asked. Annie nodded. "Yes, my mom works there." The room went completely silent. William did not look at his father. He looked at Annie. His mother spoke very carefully. "Annie," she said, "that woman is not part of this family." Annie frowned. "She is my mom," Annie said. "That means she is my family." His father's voice hardened slightly. "That woman left you," he said. "A mother who leaves her child is not a good mother." William felt Annie's hand tighten on his sleeve. "She didn't leave because she didn't love me," Annie said. "She left because you were mean to her." William closed his eyes for a brief second. His mother's face went pale. "Who told you that?" "Dad did," Annie said. "He said Mom is kind and you hurt her feelings. And he didn't protect her, and that was his mistake." The silence that followed was heavy and complete. William's father slowly turned his head and looked at his son. "You told her that?" he asked. "Yes," William said. "I told her the truth." His father leaned back in his chair, studying him. "You always were too emotional when it came to that woman." "No," William said quietly. "I was not emotional enough. That was the problem." His mother spoke again, her voice colder now. "You are risking everything for a waitress and a small restaurant." William looked at her calmly. "I am risking nothing," he said. "I am choosing my family." "You already have a family," his father said sharply, gesturing around the table. William shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "I had a family that expected obedience. Now I want a family that is built on love." His father's eyes hardened. "Be very careful, William. Everything you have comes from this family." William nodded. "I know. The money, the company, the name." He paused. "But Annie does not come from this family. Annie comes from me and Sarah, and I will not let you hurt her mother again." His mother looked at Annie, then back at William. "If that woman comes back into your life, there will be consequences." Annie spoke before William could. "If you make my mom cry again," Annie said, her small voice very clear in the large room, "I won't come to this house anymore." William's mother stared at her, shocked. Annie continued, "My teacher says family is the people who love you and take care of you. My mom loves me. My dad loves me. So they are my family. If you are mean to them, Then you are not acting like family. William felt something in his chest that was very close to pride and very close to heartbreak at the same time. His father looked at Annie for a long moment. Then at William. "She is very much your daughter," the old man said. "Yes," William replied. "She is." Dinner ended shortly after that. No one raised their voice. No one apologized. But something had changed. Lines had been drawn, quietly, but clearly. When William and Annie walked back to the car, Annie looked very serious. "Dad," she said, "I was brave." "Yes," William said. "You were very brave." "Were you brave too?" she asked. William thought about the last 6 years, about the restaurant, about Sarah, about the dinner table they had just left. "I am learning," he said. Annie nodded. "That's okay," she said. "We can learn together." As he drove away from the big house, William realized something very clearly. For most of his life, he had been trying to become the man his father wanted him to be. Now, for the first time, he was trying to become the man his daughter believed he could be, and those were two very different men. The morning after the dinner at his parents' house, William did something he had not done in 6 years. He drove to a place he had been avoiding. The cemetery was quiet, with long rows of stones and trees that moved gently in the wind. William parked the car but didn't get out right away. Annie sat in the back seat, holding her pink notebook, watching him carefully. "Whose grave are we visiting?" she asked softly. William looked at the steering wheel for a long moment before answering. "Your grandmother," he said. "My mother." Annie blinked, surprised. "Grandma died?" William nodded. 2 years ago. "Why didn't we visit before?" Annie asked. William didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Because I was still angry. And sometimes when you're angry, you stay away instead of saying goodbye properly." They got out of the car and walked slowly through the cemetery until William stopped in front of a white stone. Annabelle Carter. It read. Beneath the name were the dates, and below that a sentence. "Family is everything." Annie read it out loud. "Family is everything," she repeated. Then she looked up at William. Did Grandma believe that? William let out a slow breath. "Yes," he said. "She did. She just had a very strict idea of what a family should look like." Annie thought about that, then placed her small notebook on the grass and knelt down. "Hello, Grandma," she said politely. "I'm Annie. I think you know that already. I met Mom. She's very nice. You were wrong about her, but that's okay because people can make mistakes." William closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead, but there was a small, sad smile on his face. "I'm going to help Dad be brave," Annie continued, talking to the grave like she was talking to a person sitting in front of her. "And Mom is coming back, I think. So maybe our family will be okay again. I hope you're not mad." William swallowed hard and looked at his mother's name carved into the stone. "I loved her," he said quietly, more to himself than to Annie. "But she taught me how to be successful, not how to be happy. And I think those are different things." They stood there for a few minutes in silence. Finally, Annie took his hand. "Dad," she said, "you can love people and still say they were wrong." William looked down at her. "Yes," he said, "I think that's true." That afternoon, they went to the restaurant as usual, but Sarah immediately knew something was different. "You look like you've been somewhere important," she said to William. "We went to see my mother," he said. Sarah froze slightly. "Oh," she said softly. "I didn't know. She died 2 years ago," William said. "Stroke." Sarah didn't know what to say. She had imagined 1,000 times what she would say if she ever saw William's mother again. She had imagined anger, arguments, finally telling her how much she had suffered. She had never imagined that woman would already be gone. "I'm sorry," Sarah said quietly. And she meant it. William nodded. "I was angry at her for a long time," he said, "but today I realized something. If I keep blaming my parents for what happened 6 years ago, then I never have to admit that I was the one who made the final choice." Sarah looked at him carefully. "I could have walked away from the company," William continued. "I could have chosen you and Annie and a smaller life. But I didn't. I chose the easier path. So if I want a different ending now, I have to stop acting like I was just a victim of my family. I was also part of the problem. Sarah didn't speak for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "Thank you for saying that. Not for me. For Annie. She needs to grow up hearing the truth. Not a story where everyone lies to protect their pride." William nodded. "I know." Annie walked over holding her notebook. "Mom," she said, "I talked to Grandma today." Sarah looked surprised. "You did?" "Yes," Annie said. She didn't answer, but I think she heard me. Sarah knelt down. "What did you tell her?" "I told her you're nice and she was wrong," Annie said. "But I said it politely." Sarah laughed softly. "That was good of you. And I told her we are fixing our family," Annie continued. "So she doesn't have to worry anymore." Sarah looked at William when she heard that. Fixing our family. Such simple words for something that felt so big and fragile. That evening, after Annie was busy drawing, Sarah and William stood outside the restaurant for a moment while the sun was setting. "I need to ask you something," Sarah said. "Anything," William replied. "If I come back," she said slowly, "if I really come back to you and Annie, what happens when your father tries to push me out again? Because he will. Men like him don't stop. They just wait." William looked out at the street, then back at her. "Then this time," he said quietly, "I don't negotiate. I don't ask for permission. I don't try to keep everyone happy. This time, I choose you, and I keep choosing you. Every day. Not just when it's easy." Sarah studied his face for a long time, like she was trying to see if this promise was made by the young man who had once let her walk away, or by someone else. "I don't need a perfect man, William," she said. "I just need a man who doesn't leave when things get hard." William nodded. "Then that's the man I will spend the rest of my life trying to be." Inside the restaurant, Annie was drawing again. When they came back in, she held up the picture. It was a drawing of 3 people at a table. Above them, she had written in big letters, "We are fixing our family." William looked at the drawing and felt something he had not felt in many years. Not guilt, not regret, not fear. Responsibility. And this time, he was not going to run from it. The next few weeks passed in a strange, gentle rhythm that none of them wanted to disturb. William still ran his company during the day. Sarah still ran her restaurant. Annie still went to school and came home with new stories, new drawings, new questions every day. But now their lives overlapped in small, important ways. Dinner together at the restaurant, Sundays at the big house, braided hair in the mornings, the porch light on every night. It wasn't a perfect family, but it was starting to become a real one. One evening, Annie came into the restaurant looking more serious than usual. She didn't run to the counter. She didn't start talking about school. She walked in slowly, holding her notebook tightly against her chest. Sarah noticed immediately. "What happened?" she asked, kneeling down. "Did something happen at school?" Annie nodded slowly. "We had family day today," she said. William, who had just walked in behind her, felt something tighten in his chest. "Family day?" he repeated. Annie nodded. Everyone had to draw their family tree and talk about their parents and grandparents and where they come from. She looked down at her notebook. Some kids have very big family trees. Sarah and William exchanged a quick glance. "And what did you do?" Sarah asked gently. Annie opened her notebook and showed them a page. On it was a drawing of a tree. On one branch, she had written DAD. On another branch, she had written MOM. On a smaller branch below, she had written ME. Off to the side, a little separated, she had written Grandpa and Grandma. "I didn't know where to put Grandpa and Grandma," Annie said quietly, "because they are family, but they don't like Mom. So I didn't know if they should be on the same branch." Sarah felt her throat tighten. William pulled out a chair and sat down slowly beside Annie. "There are different kinds of family," William said carefully. "Some families are connected by blood. Some families are connected by love. The lucky ones have both." Annie looked at her drawing again. "I think Mom and Dad and me are on the love branch," she said. "And Grandpa and Grandma are on the blood branch." Sarah let out a small, surprised laugh through her tears. "That might be the smartest family tree anyone has ever made," she said. Annie nodded, satisfied. but then her face grew serious again. "One boy in my class said my family is broken," she said quietly. "He said moms don't leave if they love you." The words landed like a stone in the middle of the table. Sarah went very still. William's hand slowly closed into a fist on the table, but he kept his voice calm when he spoke. "And what did you say?" he asked Annie. Annie looked up at both of them. "I said my family is not broken," she said. "I said my mom was forced to leave and my dad made a mistake and now we are fixing it. And I said fixing something is harder than breaking something, so I think we are a strong family." Sarah turned away, covering her mouth, trying not to cry in front of Annie. William put his arm around Annie and pulled her gently closer. "You were right," he said quietly. "We are a strong family." Annie leaned into him. "But I didn't like when he said that," she admitted. "It made my chest hurt." Sarah knelt down in front of her and took both of Annie's hands. "Listen to me," she said softly. "Families are not perfect. Every family has a story. Some stories are easy and some stories are hard. Ours is a hard story, but hard stories can still have happy endings." Annie looked at her very carefully. "Are we going to have a happy ending?" she asked. Sarah looked at William. William looked at Sarah. "I think," William said slowly, "happy endings are not something you find. They are something you build, day by day, choice by choice." Annie thought about that. "So we are building it?" she asked. "Yes," Sarah said. "We are building it." That night, after Annie fell asleep at the restaurant again, Sarah and William sat at the small table by the window. "She's starting to notice everything," Sarah said quietly. "The way people look at us, the way your family talks about me, the questions at school." William nodded. "I know. I don't want her to grow up feeling like she has to defend our story all the time," Sarah said. "She's just a child." William was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Marry me." Sarah blinked, completely caught off guard. "What?" "Marry me," he said again, calmer this time. "Not because of my parents, not because of money, not because of the past. Marry me because we have a daughter who deserves a family that doesn't live in the middle of a question mark." Sarah stared at him, her heart beating fast. "You already asked me that once," she said softly. "6 years ago." "I know," he said. "And when things got hard, I failed you. I know that. So this time I'm not asking you to trust my words. I'm asking you to watch my actions. And if one day you believe me, then marry me." Sarah looked down at the table, at her hands, at the life she had built alone, at the man sitting in front of her, who had once broken her heart, and was now, slowly, patiently, trying to put the pieces back together. "You're asking me to risk everything again," she said quietly. William shook his head. "No," he said. "I'm asking you to let me be the one who risks everything this time." Sarah looked at him for a long time. Then she said the only honest thing she could say. "I don't know yet," she said. "But I'm not walking away anymore." William nodded. "That's enough," he said. Outside, the streetlights came on one by one. Inside, Annie slept with her head on her folded arms, her pink notebook under her cheek, the page open to the drawing that said, "We are fixing our family." And at the small table by the window, two people who had once loved each other, lost each other, and found each other again sat quietly. Not at the end of their story, but somewhere in the middle where the ending was still being written. The next Sunday, Sarah stood in front of the big house again. But this time, she was not standing outside wondering what her life would have been like if things had gone differently. This time, she was standing at the door because Annie had insisted, "Sunday is family day, so Mom has to be there." Sarah held a small bag in her hand. Inside were containers of food she had cooked since early morning: roast chicken, vegetables, fresh bread, and the apple pie Annie loved. She did not know if she was allowed to bring food into this house, but she brought it anyway. It was the only way she knew how to take care of people. William opened the door before she could knock. For a moment, they just stood there looking at each other. 6 years ago, this house had been the place where everything fell apart. Today, it was the place where they were trying to build something new. "You don't have to look so nervous," William said gently. "I'm not nervous," Sarah replied. Then she exhaled. Okay. I'm nervous. William took the bag from her hand. Come in, he said. You're not a guest here. Annie came running down the stairs the moment she heard Sarah's voice. Mom, you're here, she shouted, throwing her arms around her. I said I would come on Sunday, Sarah said, hugging her tightly. Yes, but sometimes adults say things and then something important happens and they don't come, Annie said very seriously. William winced slightly. That has happened before, he admitted. Yes, Annie said. But now we are a fixing family. So we come when we say we come. Sarah smiled and nodded. Yes, she said. Now we come when we say we come. They went into the kitchen, and Sarah immediately started taking food out of the containers. You cooked all this? William asked. Yes, she said. I didn't know what you usually eat, so I just cooked normal food. Annie looked at the table as Sarah placed the dishes down. This looks like restaurant food, she said. This is restaurant food, Sarah replied. Just not expensive restaurant food. Annie climbed onto her chair. This is better, she said. They sat at the big dining table again, but this time something was different. This time there were 3 plates, 3 glasses, 3 people talking at the same table, passing food, asking simple questions like, do you want more? And, is it too hot? And, did you have a good week? It was ordinary, and because it was ordinary, it felt extraordinary. Halfway through lunch, Annie said, Wait, and ran upstairs. She came back with her pink notebook. I have to read the last page, she said. The last page? William asked. Yes, Annie said. I was saving it for when Mom came home for real. Sarah looked at her. For real? She asked softly. Yes, Annie said. Not restaurant home, house home. William felt his chest tighten slightly. Annie opened the notebook and began to read. Things to tell Mom when she comes home, she read. I lost my first tooth. I learned how to read. Dad burns pancakes, but he tries. I had a bad dream and Dad slept on the floor next to me. I missed you every day. I am not mad. I am just waiting. Sarah was already crying, but Annie kept reading. And the last thing, Annie said, turning the page. Welcome home, Mom. The room went completely quiet. Sarah covered her mouth, crying openly now. William looked down at the table, blinking hard, trying to keep his composure and failing. Annie closed the notebook and looked at Sarah. You can put your picture on my wall now, she said, because you're not lost anymore. Sarah stood up from her chair and walked around the table, then knelt beside Annie and held her so tightly. Annie squeaked a little. I'm not lost anymore, Sarah whispered. I'm home. William stood up too and walked over to them. For a moment, the 3 of them just stood there holding each other in the middle of the dining room. The big empty house no longer feeling empty at all. After a while, Annie pulled back and looked at both of them very seriously. Now I have a question, she said. William smiled slightly. You always have a question. Annie nodded. Dad asked Mom to marry him again, she said. I heard you at the restaurant. I was not asleep. William closed his eyes. Of course you heard. Annie looked at Sarah. Are you going to marry my dad? Sarah looked at William. William looked at Sarah. The question hung in the air. But this time it didn't feel heavy. It just felt important. I don't need a big wedding, Annie continued. We can just eat cake. But I think Dad should marry you because he already loves you and I already love you and we are already a family. We just need the paper. William laughed softly, shaking his head. The paper, he repeated. Sarah looked at Annie, then at William, then around the house, at the table, at the light coming through the window, at the life that had somehow circled back to this moment. I'm still a little scared, she said honestly. William nodded. I know, but I'm not scared of loving you, she continued. I'm only scared of losing this again. William stepped closer to her. Then we protect it, he said. Together, every day. No more leaving, no more choosing other people, just us. Sarah looked at Annie, who was watching them like this was the most important moment in the world. Okay, Sarah said softly. Yes, I'll marry you. Annie screamed so loudly she almost knocked over her chair. Yes, now we are a real fixing family. William laughed. and Sarah laughed. And Annie hugged both of them at the same time. And for the first time in many, many years, the Carter house was filled with something it had never really had before. Not power, not money, not silence, but laughter and forgiveness, and a small voice that had waited 6 years to say the words she had written in her notebook a long time ago. Welcome home, Mom. This story is about forgiveness, responsibility, and the quiet kind of love that does not disappear even after years of separation. It reminds us that success, money, and social status mean very little if we lose the people who truly love us. The story shows that sometimes people make mistakes not because they do not love each other, but because they are afraid, proud, or too weak to stand up at the right moment. But the most important lesson is this: it is never too late to fix what was broken. Family is not the people who control you, but the people who stay, who forgive, and who keep the light on so you can find your way back home. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.